Hi, everyone. My name is Elena Cree. Welcome to the 6th session of the live Q&As for the Climate Action Solutions for a Changing Planet course. Very excited to be here with you today. We are now in the final week of our 12-week course. We started covering the Paris Climate Agreement, and then we transitioned to looking at some specific renewables and technologies, went through wind power, nuclear, carbon capture and sequestration. Then we looked at the ag sector and what different land use practices and how that affects the carbon budget. And last week, I believe you were looking at more of the climate policy side. What are carbon credits? How can that help us to reduce our overall emissions? And this week, we have been hearing from the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. So I'm very excited to have live with us today Maria Mendiluce, who is the Managing Director of Natural Capital for the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. Maria did one of the videos in the Module 7 from WBCSD. So she's here today to share her experiences with the WBCSD and talk more about the topics that she covered in her course. So welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for giving us the time today. We're really excited to have you online.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
So let's just jump right into it, Maria. I wonder if you could maybe start with more of a in-depth intro and give us a little bit of your background and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thank you. So I'm Maria. I'm Spanish. I come from a town in the north of Spain. The name is Pamplona. And soon after I finished my studies in economics, I joined the International Energy Agency, where I was a statistician for 3.5 years. And I learned everything about the energy balances, the different energy sources, etc. And soon I realized when I was there that I didn't know enough. So while I was doing that job, I enrolled into an MBA that then led to a thesis, which I did during my professional career. But then from there, I worked in a power company in Iberdrola. I learned a lot about renewables in that company. And then I decided to do my PhD, so I took a break. And while I was doing the PhD, I was called, there was a position in the Spanish government in the Prime Minister's office, which I joined. And then I was the special advisor on sustainable development there for a couple of years. That gave me lots of information that were really useful for my thesis. So in fact, my thesis was built on my professional experience, which is kind of unusual when you do a PhD. And then finally, I found this job in Geneva at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where I have been working for the past 9 years. And I have been doing different things, but mostly I have been working on climate. At the beginning, we were working more in cross-cutting policies in the topic of technology transfer, R&D, etc. But then as the leadership in the organization changed, then we moved to work much more on solutions. So we started on the road to Paris, the Low Carbon Technology Partnership Initiative, which I led, and where I coordinated the different activities that my colleagues were doing on climate at the World Business Council. So it was quite successful. We managed to bring around 150 people to Paris, companies to Paris, working on 9 solutions. And I think you have heard about them on the MOOC, because we make sure that you heard about from the leaders, the LCTPI leads, as we call them. So it has been very exciting. The LCTPI is now 3 years old and it's up and running, and there are always new initiatives that are emerging, so it's quite exciting. Well, in the organization, I moved on, and I'm now also, in addition to climate, I'm in charge of other areas. Since past November, I'm managing the area of circular economies and cities and transport. So I have 3 kids. And I'm quite happy living in Geneva, which is a fantastic place to be living at.
Thank you for that. So I think we just got a really good idea of all of the different sectors you've had either been working directly on or are familiar with. So I guess we're going to focus today on the private sector being the focus of WBCSD, even though you've had some really great experience in the public sector, it sounds like, as well. So just based on the last few years, just wondering, which industries or specific sectors in the private sector would you say are taking the most initiative towards this decarbonization agenda?
Well, I think in my view, we have been seeing a revolution on the energy sector in relation to the development of renewable energies. And I started working on renewable energies back in the year 2000. And in that company, in Iberdrola, they had a diversified set of investments on renewables, but never, they were just having some financial investments. That the company changed the strategy and decided to make renewables a strategic pillar of the company, which has proven to be very successful. No? But it was not something that happened from one day to the other. It took the renewable industry since then, I think it was 2015, it's when the renewable energy started to be competitive. Thanks to massive investments of many companies in Europe, in Spain, in Germany, also in China, in the US, that has led to the reduction of cost of renewable energy, which was triggered a revolution that we are experiencing now, and that will impact the way that we produce and consume energy in the years to come.
That's wonderful. Maybe, Maria, you could just remind us and the students listening in, could you give us a quick overview of the WBCSD, how it started and how it works exactly? I believe it's like a global membership of private organizations, but I'm sure you could speak to it in a bit more detail than that. I know Peter Baker in the course gave an overview, but perhaps the students listened to the video a bit long ago, so just a quick reminder would be helpful.
Sounds good. So the World Business Council was founded after Rio, the Conference of Rio in '92, and it was a spin-off from the International Chamber of Commerce, and it was an attempt by some progressive companies to create an institution that will bring the progressive business voice on sustainable development to the international processes. And since then, we have been up and running. We have the Secretariat is formed by around 70 people, mainly based in Geneva, but we have offices in New York and in India. And what we do is, we are working on all the issues that are relevant for business in the area of sustainability. Now, the way that, we have been evolving in the way that we're tackling these issues. And right now, we are reorganizing ourselves around the system transformation that the world needs to go through in order to tackle the present challenges that we face both in the environment and social side. So we have 5 big programs on climate and energy and circular economy, cities and transport, food, land and water, on the people, which is the social impact, jobs, skills, etc. And another one which is called redefining value, that is looking at how to redefine the way that companies report progress by including what they are doing in terms of environmental and social practices as well. That, as you know, they are not capturing the P&L of any companies. Mm-hmm. So we work with companies. We have 200 companies that work with us. And it is a must-have for those companies to be active at least in one of those areas, no? And they do, and they're really active, and they're active in many more than one. And we work in different projects, and so on the climate space is the Low Carbon Technology Partnership Initiatives, on circular economies, Factor 10, and so on and so forth. And so we represent pretty much the business voice, because we are not a think tank that tells business what to do, but rather we work with business in expressing what business wants. No? But we do it always with the lens of sustainability in mind. No? And we spend a lot of time trying to make the case that it makes business sense to do certain actions. No? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But we need to find additional arguments so that we can make the case that it does make business sense.
I was just going to ask that question too. Like, what's the biggest incentive for a company, like when they come and approach the WBCSD or uses any of your resources? Is it usually with an economic drive in mind, that they're trying to, get that margin even bigger and cut losses or be a bit more efficient? Or is it more like a long-term business model and they actually care about sustainability, environment, and resource management?
Yeah, no, I think it's rather the second. No, I think here we are non-profit, so there's no money making. However, it gives an opportunity for companies to understand the trends, to understand the new business opportunities, to meet their peers that are going through similar challenges in their companies, and to figure out collaboratively new ways of working with others while at the same time, continuing in business, continuing to make profits, etc. But how to align the company's operations with a vision of a more sustainable future. That's what most of the companies, that come to us care when working with us.
So did you guys did a lot of companies come to you after the Paris Agreement or leading up to the Paris Agreement? I know you mentioned that you brought 150 companies to that stage, but so how did that global agreement really affect this dialogue and the interest of these companies?
Yeah, so we have had lots of companies that have joined, others leave because the business sector is very vibrant, and sometimes things go well, sometimes there are mergers, sometimes they change, the leadership change and the interest change. But where we have seen the area that we have seen that is growing up the most is on the area of food, land and water, especially the food and land, because we started new programs in that area. WBCSD traditionally has been an organization more for the big manufacturing companies, but now we are divesting to these more consumer goods or food and agriculture companies, which is really interesting. And I think, yes, of course, the climate side is very important, but there are also other sides that relate more to sustainable lifestyles, and to how do you find a healthy diet, for example, etc. How do you build resilience for an agricultural company that will be impacted by climate change? I see that those are the areas where we're growing mostly, which is very exciting.
Fantastic. So now you mentioned the LCTPI, the Low Carbon Technology Pathway Initiative, lots of acronyms. So I wonder if you can maybe give us a quick background on that. I believe that's now your focus of work.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so the LCTPI was created on the road to Paris. It was endorsed by Laurence Toubiana, who was the champion that was managing the negotiations for the COP in the COP21. And we had the support from the International Energy Agency and SDSN. And that's why you and me were together here, because the collaboration worked really well between the organizations. And as I said before, we formed nine groups that were working on different things. So we have the one on renewables, on sustainable fuels, on low carbon freight, energy efficiency in buildings, cement, chemicals, forest, agriculture, climate smart agriculture, and carbon capture and storage. And we asked them to follow the same process. First, they needed to give us what is the ambition, how much could that sector do, to how they could contribute to the 2 degrees goal. And so they all came up with some numbers on how many emission reductions could be done by that sector, based on research, etc. The next thing, and the fact that they were committed to that vision, it didn't mean that they were going to reduce emissions, but those emissions, because they only represented a fragment of the actors that need to be involved in order to achieve those emission reductions, but that they thought that that was possible, and that gave us a very high number. In fact, if you added all them up, it was 65% of the emissions that were required to meet the Paris Agreement could be done in the sectors that the LCTPI is covering. But then what we say, okay, well, I mean, fantastic, we have this ambition, but what are the barriers that companies face to achieve that ambition? And what are the solutions that you as companies can, propose to overcome those barriers? So it was very pragmatic, very business oriented. It was not about telling governments what they need to do, but rather telling business and telling each other what they could do together to remove the barriers. And then finally, once we understood what were the solutions that were created, then we developed some action plans, which became the work programs for the year. And we've been doing that for 3 years, and those work plans are reviewed as when we complete what they were supposed to do. So there are some interesting things that have come out of those work plans. For example, I was last week in India, and we had a workshop where we were talking with companies that want to buy renewable energy, and they want to understand what are the instruments that they can use to buy that renewable energy directly, and not going through the grid, we had a similar workshop earlier in August in Argentina. No? So I find there's lots of things that are happening. Some of the solutions can be applicable to many business. And so that gives us hope, no? That, yeah, there are many solutions. Business can act in their sectors where they operate, and there's always a benefit. There's a good benefit of working with others to understand the potential and the new business opportunities.
So I understand you have a global secretariat. So I wonder that when you go to India and you're having workshops that are in a very local question like that, like how do I access renewable energy? Are you working with local actors there, and do you have like a local office that plugs you into those stakeholders?
Yeah, so in the case of Argentina, we have a very strong business council in Argentina, which is the Argentina CADS Business Council, and there we have a world expert on climate, fantastic, Virginia, and we work with her. In the case of India, it's one of the only countries, well, with the US, where we have an office. So we have hired someone to work for us in that office and to run this work program. And I find that also that it's new for us, but I think it's fascinating because we can build capacity in emerging economies that can, spread the word and work with those companies in that context. No? Because let's remind the students that India, it will be in the 2025, I think the country where most energy is going to be consumed. So we need to decarbonize India, and so we need to bring solutions that are applicable to the Indian context.
So we actually have a student listening live now who just asked a question. Nixon asked about how many companies are from India as part of the WBCSD. I wonder maybe if you could give an overall geography, like are they mainly from Europe or the South or?
Yeah, so I think around 45% are Europeans. Then I don't have the stats in front of me, but I think I would say 15-20% are American. We have 10 to 15% are Japanese. And then we have in India, I don't know how many. So it's a mixture because we also have global companies that have operations in India with whom we work. So I think in total, there might be around 40 companies with whom we work in India. But Indians, I think they would be between 10 and 15. But I will have to check the numbers. I don't know them by heart. Great. But for example, on the workshop that we had 55 participants from India, and also in the renewables LCTPI. So we have 42 companies that are engaged globally, of which 20 something are engaged in India. So it's a very solid group. Yeah. It's quite unique, the case of India. We don't have that for the other countries like Malaysia, Australia, whatever. We just don't have the capacity to go. But I'm quite proud of our Indian team.
Wonderful. And Nixon, we will post a link later for you too with those stats from the WBCSD website. Okay, so moving on to a new question. I think we all understand that businesses can do a lot and they contribute a lot of resources to research and development and cutting edge technologies, but sometimes it's really dependent on, the government and how much support that you have from the policy point of view. So how can business and government be better integrated to help creating and enforcing some of this climate policy and helping to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I think business, little by little, is regaining trust from governments that they are fair play and a good player to work with. And I think we have achieved that thanks to the massive support from business to the climate agreement. So I think now we need to move the relationship to the next step, which is to work better together in sharing our best practice and sharing the learnings and providing, sensible policy recommendations. And that's why sometimes the work that we do is valuable, because we are not talking about one particular country, but several countries that are facing similar problems and where we provide some recommendations. So I think that's very important, and that's an area where we will be strengthening our relationships and strengthening as well our policy asks. However, when we started the LCTPI, the approach was, well, let's see how much the business sector can do by themselves, because they can do a lot, and without the need to intervene in the policies. No, although some policies will facilitate that. No? So we have seen many companies, for example, committing to 100% renewables. There's a really good initiative by the Climate Group that is trying to support that, which is fantastic, which kind of lead us to another conversation with governments. So in the same way that governments are asking companies to commit to renewables, to electric vehicles, to smart agriculture, I think we citizens and business can also ask governments to commit to procuring renewable energy, procuring electric vehicles, to upgrading their buildings to make them more efficient. So I think they need to also walk the talk. And when they walk the talk, they can learn a lot from business as well, because the business have gone through that journey. And because whether the building itself doesn't know whether the owner is the public or private institution, the problems are the same, whether it's for a business or for the government. So I think government can also learn from what the private sector is doing. And yeah, we hope we can facilitate that discussion.
Great. So we just got a question from Salil. So this is more specifically in one of the LCTPIs, I think will be applicable to maybe the cement or the construction sector. But so how do you implement energy efficiency building codes in countries where more than 80% of the construction happens in the informal sector? I assume they mean, outside of the rules and regulation.
Yeah, well, I think that's an excellent question, and with a very complex reply, no? And because the big problem with the building codes often is the lack of enforcement, no? Because it requires a lot of resources to go and check if the building is following is compliant with the regulation, no? And so I find this a challenge that all countries face, no? I would think that little by little, with the development of new technologies, we could standardize the compliance and the verification of those regulations, so which will lead to a more formal building sector in a way. So, but I think we are far away from that, no? And so the other thing that I think governments can work in is to raise the awareness and educate the consumers that when they do things in an informal sector or not following the regulations, there are some risks associated with them that they better not take. No, but I know this is an incomplete reply, and that's a fascinating question that I think students should try to also do some research and try to find out more how we could overcome that. To my knowledge, I don't think we have done any specific work on that topic, but it has surfaced in our conversations.
Great. So then, as from the consumer perspective, and assuming all of us students, everybody even interested in sustainability, we're all consumers at some level. Are there different tools or platforms you could kind of point us to help us be more responsible? So if I wanted to purchase all of my shampoos from a company that's at least trying to do the right things, how could I find out who is or at least trying?
Yeah, well, listen, I'm sure there are, but I don't have any of those websites on the top of my mind. I have seen a lot of. It is true that maybe we're not facilitating the task to consumers, because I have seen a lot of websites where we place the commitments that companies do. But whether those websites don't go to the product level to explain, okay, these products, these companies are more sustainable or not. I mean, there are some research organizations or some journalists that might do that analysis, but there's not a standard process of comparing all products. Maybe for a particular sector there are, no? And it's very specific to that sector. No? But what is true is that many companies are, have in the consumer goods sectors, believe that their clients want more sustainable products, no? And so they're using a lot of publicity to announce them, which then lead to many many NGOs to check whether what they're saying is right or wrong. And then if they say something wrong, they will voice it through the social media, through the press, etc., quite loudly. No? So I think the big companies cannot afford to have that reputational risks, and they make sure that they comply with what they're saying that they are doing. Maybe other organizations use sustainability terms in different ways that might not be as rigorous. So I think the social, the academic sector and the NGOs have a role to play as well to chase and to make sure that that the information that is flying to consumers is appropriate and correct.
So maybe then, other than just choosing products or doing research on specific companies, are there any other roles that consumers can play in, helping to encourage businesses to be more sustainable?
Yeah, well, I think there are many things that you can do as a consumer. You have a lot of choices, no? I mean, if you start with, you can decide to power your house with renewable energy instead of taking it from the grid. You can decide to buy a car that is that is electric, or you decide not to buy a car because you can use it with your app and you can have access to mobility, no? And at the end of the day, it's about the consumer choices, and also the consumers face challenges. I often, when I say I work in sustainability, they ask, the person with whom I work in suddenly say, I feel terrible because I take my car to go to work, which I also sometimes take my car as well. So I think consumers need to have the choices so that they can also by their actions reduce emissions, and sometimes those choices are not available, and that's where they should demand more from business so that they make those products available.
Great. So Maria, we had another specific question from a student that asked about the historical major contributors to emissions, and if you think they're asking you personally if you think that they have a responsibility to finance or contribute more to the R&D to getting us to this decarbonized future. Yeah, well, I think I don't think that's going to happen. I find that sometimes. So let's face it. So we are all using transport, and that transport is fueled by oil. And we are working on solutions, but they still are not there, no? Who's responsible? The company that provides the oil or the consumer that consumes that oil, no? And I think we are all responsible. The company would have to decarbonize the fuel so that it produces less emission, and of course they have the capacity to do some research, etc. And then the consumers need to demand that, no? And so I find it would be very difficult that they will have financial penalties from the historical responsibilities. I don't think that would happen. I think the best thing that can happen is that we transform the system so that we can move to low carbon products and services, and so that the market naturally, select those companies that are selling the products that are less harmful for the environment and for climate. Thank you for that. So I'm gonna for all those listening live, I'm gonna say to put in your questions now or start thinking about them, because we're gonna start to wrap up towards the end here. So Maria, you've given us a really good overview of, the direction that the business world is heading in, and a few of the efforts that they're undertaking, and a few sectors that are really pushing forward. So since we have about 1,000 students here who are obviously interested in sustainability, interested in the climate conversation and low emission technologies. So just based on your experience in working and interfacing with the private sector, maybe you could give a bit of career advice. What specific skills or background would be really useful for someone who wants to come and get involved in this space between private business and sustainability? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think sustainability opportunities in the sustainability world are going to appear in all the sectors and for all the functions, no?
So my advice is that first you need to be very strong in your main education, whether you're an engineer or a chemist or an economist. Develop skills on that sectors, and then add some masters or some education on sustainability that complements what you have been trained to do, so that then you can transform the job that you're doing, whether an economist, a chemist, a communication or policy person. You can insert sustainability in your daily life and work life. I think only studying sustainability, might not give you the technical expertise that sometimes is required, because in the sustainability space, in climate, in circular economy, we are going beyond the general speeches and going much more into the detail of the technologies itself and the system transformations and process transformation. So we need people that understand well how those systems work in order to change them. And so that would be my advice. Also, my advice would be that this is a place for entrepreneurs. So whatever you do, just take the initiative, because no one is going to take the initiative for you. You will get to where you want because you take the initiative, and you might get it wrong. So keep trying, because we often fail, and we learn from those failures, so that then when we get it right, we get it really right, and we understand how challenging is to get it right. So that calls to perseverance, where you just don't give up. Don't give up to what you believe, to your purpose, and to your goals in life, especially if those are aligned with sustainability, of course. And just fight for it. Work hard. Be technical. Be purposeful, and just work hard.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, last very specific question that we just got from a student. This might be a bit difficult. You mentioned one of the sectors, low carbon freight. So we talk a lot about EVs and the transition to public transport and electrifying the transport systems. But we also have these big tankers, and we all take flights, and this emits a lot of carbon and emissions. Is anyone making progress on decarbonizing these sectors? And if not, is there any latest research you could point us to?
Yeah, so actually it's a really good question, because on the road low carbon freight, we did a project where we studied how much emissions could be reduced if we did three things. First, if we optimize the operations of the company. Most of the problem with freight is that often the truck goes with goods, delivers, and then comes back empty. So the story is about how do you fill those trucks so that they don't come back empty. So how can you optimize the freight movement so that you optimize the use of those trucks for the distance, and you carry as many goods as possible on those routes. Which means not necessarily carrying more goods, but that you don't use several trucks to carry the same amount of goods. So the second thing, they say, okay, well, sometimes optimizing your routes, it can lead you to some emission reductions, but actually, if you increase the number of routes, so if you combine your routes with the ones from another company, then the possibilities of optimization increase. And so you can reduce even more emissions, and you can reduce them a lot. And thirdly, and most important, and it applies to you, to me, and to everybody that is listening to us. So if we increase as well the delivery window from 2 hours to 5 hours, that allows more flexibility to the truckers to be able to optimize their route. Well, if you combine the three measures, trucks could reduce at least emissions by 50%. 50. It's impressive. We didn't know. And they know, and they think that they're very efficient, But also as consumers, we know, if you want to do something, just don't be as strict. Maybe, ask the grandma on your building to pick up your delivery while you're not at home, or find out different ways of giving more flexibility for that, So in that particular project, what was excellent is, okay, excellent results. So how can we move this to practice? So what we did is we applied to several grants, and finally we won one with UK Innovate, and now we're going to test the assumptions in the real marketplace to see, from the theory to practice, how many emission reductions can be done by doing that. And so that's real, and it's going to happen, and we're very proud of having moved that forward.
Oh, well, that was like a fantastic last question after all. So we will definitely keep an eye out for that report. That sounds like a really interesting, practical solution. And 50% is a pretty impressive. And I imagine they're saving money too with these increased efficiencies.
Of course, 30%. They are earning 30% more money because they are reducing their costs. Incredible.
Those win-wins, they do exist. Well, Maria, I didn't get any more questions, so I think at this time, unless you have any final thoughts you want to throw out there, I will let you go, and thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Well, thanks a lot, Elena. Like always, a pleasure to work with you.
For sure, and hopefully see you soon.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much.